Alright guys, so in this video we are going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that Sony's current PlayStation CEO went on record saying during an interview that I think most of it, you'll definitely find as good news. The other piece of news, well, it's more speculation than anything. I don't think anybody's going to freak out over it, but I did find it interesting, and it definitely brings up an interesting conversation regarding the long-term future of what we call traditional console gaming. But starting out here, it says that Sony will never walk away from narrative-based games, says PlayStation CEO. President and CEO of Sony's PlayStation division, Jim Ryan, has gone on record about the company's success with narrative-driven story-based games, saying it's certainly not a genre of gaming we'll ever walk away from. In an interview with CNET, Ryan was asked about the future of live service games like Anthem and Fallout 76, and if they are the future of interactive entertainment when compared to the narrative-driven games Sony has been focusing on for some time, which includes God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, and more. And this is what he's quoted with saying, "We've never had greater success with our own narrative-driven story-based games than we're having right now. We feel good about that, and it's certainly not a genre of gaming we'll ever walk away from. Service games, when done well, will continue to be popular and grow in popularity, but only as the overall gaming ecosystem grows and more people are playing more and more games longer and longer." So I found this to be a very reassuring thing for him to say, honestly. I always think it's important to pay attention anytime these people like Jim Ryan or others like Sean Layden or even people like Phil Spencer, anybody who's in a leadership role within these gaming divisions, because we care about this. Not everybody cares, but people like us, we do care, and I think it's important to pay close attention to what they have to say, because it oftentimes does give us a good glimpse into where they're headed and what their plans are, especially at a time like this where we are nearing the end of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One life cycle, and we are about to enter the 9th generation of consoles. And hearing that this is a genre of game that they're never going to walk away from, honestly, music to my ears. As somebody who has recently been playing a lot of Sony's single-player story-driven games this generation, I've been playing a lot of them in a short period of time, and they are phenomenal, and they are life-changing to an extent, depending on how much you care about video games and how important the medium is to you. And for me, some of these games were super impactful, and I'll never forget them, and I consider myself a PlayStation fan for life now, because I'll never forget some of these experiences. And I know that may sound a little bit exaggerated to some people, but it's really important, in my opinion, that Sony, especially Sony, because of not just the success financially that they found, but I think that's important to pay attention to as well, is that Sony is, I don't want to say single-handedly, but in many ways, they are one of the only gaming publishers that are out here kind of showing that, look, single-player games, narrative-driven games, they are alive and well, and they are extremely important. And not only that, but they can be financially successful. They can be lucrative if they're done right. And Sony has been doing it right. And I think it's kind of mind-blowing that more publishers aren't looking at Sony and thinking, we need to try to do that ourselves. There are some, but there needs to be more. Now, I like multiplayer experiences as well. And so as much as I love the single-player experience, I would also not be opposed to Sony deciding going into next generation to try to have a few more multiplayer offerings. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know that there is a large group of people who, if Sony came out and said that we're never making multiplayer games, we are only doing single-player story-driven games, I know that there's a substantial group of people that would certainly be perfectly fine with that and actually really happy about that, and that's totally understandable as well. There's a lot of people who just don't care about multiplayer games. I like both, though. I think they both have a place within any gaming platform, and I'm just very relieved to hear that going into next generation for the foreseeable future, and if what Jim Ryan is saying here is to be believed, it's just really nice to hear that this isn't something they plan on stopping. And I think that everybody can get behind that. I really don't know why anybody would be against this. And I think it's only going to get better going into the future. It's such a relief to hear somebody in the position that Jim Ryan's in. He said some, weird things in the past, but it's just such a relief to hear a CEO of a gaming company come out here and say, like, yeah, single-player narrative-driven experiences are extremely important to us, and they're never going to go away as long as we're making games. When it seems like with most other gaming companies, you're literally hearing the opposite of that. You're literally hearing the CEOs talk about how profitable and lucrative and important games as a service are to them, and while I think a game as a service, if it's done right, it can be fine. We've seen just how bad it can be, how egregious it can be, and it's really kind of hurt, I think, gaming as a whole because of how many times greedy publishers have just really messed it up. And so I just really wanted to bring this out here to not only kind of gush about it and say, listen to what he's saying, like, this is great news, but because I know that it's something that a lot of people want to hear. There's a lot of people that want to know, is this something that Sony's going to continue going into next generation? Even though it may be assumed by a lot of people, it's just really nice to hear it from Sony themselves. Yes, they are going to continue to support single-player narrative-driven experiences, so much so to the point where their CEO is coming out here letting us know it's never going to go away. So, yeah, there it is. Now, the other piece of information I want to talk about, I also find very interesting. It has to do with whether or not Jim Ryan believes that we're going to continue to see traditional consoles coming from Sony after the PlayStation 5. And his answer may surprise you a little bit. So the article says, there's no denying that the games industry has been moving its way towards a predominantly digital future for better or worse. Both game publishers and console manufacturers have been going all in on purely digital services and hardware. With that in mind, many are unsure as to whether or not the upcoming batch of consoles will be the last traditional ones. In fact, there's a fairly high-profile name who appears to be just as unsure, PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan. In an interview with CNET, Ryan was asked point-blank whether the still unnamed upcoming PlayStation console will be Sony's last. Quite frankly, his response was, I actually don't know. With an industry that's as unpredictable as video games, it truly can be impossible to see what the future is like. People widely predicted that the PlayStation 4 would be the end of the console as we know it, but with 96 million units shipped, that's far from the case. Of course, that question is being brought up again now that the digital and cloud-based gaming is becoming a cornerstone of the entertainment landscape in general. While Sony is obviously prepping itself for an increasingly digital world, simply look at the landmark deal with Microsoft, Ryan admitted who knows what the world looks like in 5 years' time. Sony already has a game streaming service, PlayStation Now, and it's all but confirmed Sony will put more focus on it with the PS5. We're already seeing a bigger focus on digital-only platforms now with Google Stadia and the Xbox One S All-Digital Edition. However, it doesn't appear that, at least for now, there's a plan to get rid of the box altogether. That doesn't mean that could change in the future, though. Whether PlayStation eventually ditches the box or not, Ryan assured fans that any transition will be steady and gradual. One possibly he mentioned was a hybrid between console and some sort of cloud. He also stresses that whether we'll play it on a box or not, one thing will remain that the same: PlayStation's library of exclusives, calling them one of the brand's enduring strengths. So very interesting things that Jim Ryan is saying here, man. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot he's saying that I can get behind. Now, I know some people might find it like bad news or disheartening that, PlayStation CEO is saying he's unsure as to whether or not we can expect a traditional console after the PlayStation 5, but we have to be real here, people. What he's saying isn't false. It's actually very true that we don't know what the gaming landscape is going to look like in 5 years. If you look at what the gaming landscape was 5 years ago, it's very different compared to what it is now. Just like 5 years from now, it's going to be extremely different. That's just how it is. It's ever evolving, and I think it would be a little bit naive of anybody, including PlayStation CEO, to sit here and make it seem like they know exactly what their plans are going into the generation after the next generation, because that just seems a little bit too far out. I think what Sony's doing here is smart, honestly. They understand that the way things are going right now, they basically have no choice but to ensure that they have a big presence in cloud gaming. Now, as much as I'm against it, as much as anybody may be against it, we do need to accept the reality that it's an area that they will need to be competitive in, because if it does take off and it does end up becoming the future of gaming, PlayStation can't risk not being involved in that in a heavy way. Now, there's no guarantee that cloud gaming is going to be the be-all, end-all and the big thing that all these companies like Google are making it seem like it's going to be. But when Google enters the race here, when Google enters the market, you would have to be pretty, I don't know, confident, overconfident, I would say, to just laugh them off and not take them as a serious competitor. Because if Google wants to get serious with this, which it seems like they are with Stadia, as much as I poke fun of them and make fun of them because I'm not interested in what they're offering, they are Google, and they can persist. They have the time and they have the money to really make a dent in the long term. So Sony and Microsoft are aware of this. That's why they partnered up. And as to whether or not I think we're going to see consoles going into the, I guess, 10th generation is what it would be called, well, I think we will. I think consoles, to an extent, will always have their place, and I don't necessarily think that there will ever be a time where there isn't a console on offer. I mean, we have to understand, Sony's the kind of company that still offers Walkmans and MP3 players at a very premium price, but because they're still as small of an audience as it may be, or market, I should say, it's still there, and they're willing to pay that price because they just still want the product. We could see in the very long term, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, maybe that's what the console will end up being, but maybe not. It really is going to be dependent upon the market. When I talk about cloud gaming, I've always said that we're going to be the ones to determine whether or not it's successful. By that, I just mean the market in general. Anybody who considers themselves a gamer is going to be the one that determines whether or not it's successful, because if that's where we're playing our games, that's where we're putting our money, well, that's just what's going to happen. But I don't really want to get too much into that. I think that we are going to continue to see consoles. I don't want to say for sure, because again, it would be naive of me to think that I know exactly what things are going to be like 5 years from now. But just knowing the way Sony is as a company, I could see them continuing to support hardware, even if other companies decide to back out from it going forward. Especially when you look at how well the PlayStation has sold for them every generation. Even with their weakest generation, with the PlayStation 3, they still made a comeback, right? They had the most successful selling console of all time with the PlayStation 2. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't continue after the PlayStation 5. But it is really reassuring to hear that Jim Ryan says it will be a steady and gradual transition in the long run. If that is a transition that ends up taking place, I'm glad he's aware and the company's aware that you don't just pull the trigger immediately. And it was really nice to hear that he points at the PlayStation's library of exclusives and calling them one of the brand's enduring strengths. Really good things here. Things I like to hear, things I think most PlayStation fans and gamers in general like to hear. But that's going to do it for the video, guys. I hope you found it interesting. I will be very interested to hear what you guys have to say down below. Let me know your thoughts on Jim Ryan's comments on single-player games, the possibility of another traditional console after the PlayStation 5. Do you think we're going to see one, or do you think there's actually a good chance we might not? And him putting extra emphasis on PlayStation's library of exclusives, calling it an enduring strength. We'll be very interested to see what you have to say. Leave the video a like if you did enjoy it, and if you found this news helpful at all, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Also, hit the bell notification icon so you can be notified anytime I upload a new video, and feel free to share the video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.